All right, so the portion consisted of the story of Joseph, or the end story of Joseph. We had the beginning a couple weeks ago, or we really didn't, but we talked about it a little bit. And then we had Tamar dipping into the middle, and now it's time for Joseph to do his thing in Egypt. We also had Daniel 7, which is probably one of the most interesting of the dreams, because it's, no matter who you go to, whether you go to a Christian scholar or to a Hebrew scholar, the debate about the messianic portion of it is always interesting, and you get really into a lot of different things. The Hebrews naturally believe that the messianic portion of it has yet to be accomplished, and the Christians believe that it's in the process of being accomplished. But it's a pretty interesting step. It's the first time the Son of Man comes into play, and the interpretations of that are pretty cool. Then you have the Acts 10 and 12, concentrated on Acts 10, which is the story of the food.
The white sheet.
Yep, the sheet with the food on it. So if we can get started out here, we're just going to read a few of them. We're not going to read them all because it would take all night to read them all. So Devin, you want to read 37, Genesis 37, 5 through 9, or 5 through 9?
Genesis
5,
7?
5 to 7, yeah. Because even though we're back on the other book, that's where the dreams started.
Okay.
This is about dreams tonight, so.
Okay, 5 through 7. Genesis 30. You said 37.
37.
5 through 7. Okay. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it."
Okay. Who wants to read 7 through 9 of that same chapter? Anybody?
Yeah, I got you. 7 through 9 of the same chapter, we were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright.
I'm sorry, I wanted just 9.
Oh, okay.
Just 9.
Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me."
One of the unique things about these dreams that Joseph had then was they were the ones that were really clear. I mean, you could interpret it the same way if you knew he had 11 kids. If there was 11 other kids in the family and a father and mother, you can connect the dots to where they were saying. Where in some of the other dreams, you got to be pretty creative to connect those dots. So, Bobby. Genesis 41, 1 through 4. I'll go ahead and read that. When the 2 full years passed, Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile. When out of the river, there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them, 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then the Pharaoh woke up. And he fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. And after them, 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up from his dream. So on that one, you can somewhat, it's a little bit harder to connect the dots, but you can tell that 7 good things happened, and then 7 bad things took over the 7 good things, which falls in line with the
Famine.
famine. That's the word. It falls in line with the famine. We're not going to read Daniel 7. It's just too long, but I think most people are familiar with it, and it was really hard to connect the dots for that one. You really have to be creative think this whole thing through to find out where they got what they got out of it. Acts 10, 9 through 13, this is another one that's also interpreted in many different ways by many different religions. The Christian, a lot of the Christian people believe that this is the verse that says that we don't have to worry about the biblical dietary guidelines anymore. The Hebrews will give you a whole other version of this verse. So, why don't you go ahead and read this one for us?
Acts 10, 9 through 13.
Yeah.
Okay, about noon of the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat. And while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to the earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals, as well as reptiles of the earth and birds of the air. "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I've never eaten anything impure or unclean." And the voice spoke to him a second time. "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean."
So those are the dreams and the visions. Two things that make this interesting is this, well, definitely is the story of Joseph. Joseph, it was funny enough, when Joseph interpreted the Pharaoh's dreams, at that time, according to the text, there's been no communication with God. It just came to him on his own. But the text goes on throughout the whole story of Joseph, saying the Lord was with him. And we know that because Joseph was a sissy, right? I mean, he was a mama's boy, he stayed around the house all the time. Daddy thought he was pretty violent. So I can understand the brothers wanted to kick his butt, a little bit. But even though the brothers wanted to kill him, they decided to go ahead and just sell him off to slavery. Some reason, it talks about the one brother that made that decision, but the Lord was with him there. Then he goes to Egypt, right? Goes to Egypt, he is very successful right off the bat because the Lord was with him. Then the Pharaoh's wife frames him, says he tried to take advantage of her. Gets sent to jail. Even in jail, it turns out okay, because he starts interpreting dreams. Next thing you know, he's the second in command of all of Egypt. So all through his life, you can see where God has been with him, and that I can relate to. I can relate to that a lot. Allie is going to tell us a little bit more about dreams.
Okay, so as most of y'all know, I just do all the context stuff, so you're going to hear a lot of science and things. So there is one big scientific problem with figuring out what dreams are, and that is we cannot empirically study them. There is no way to know for sure what somebody is dreaming because you're entirely reliant on somebody telling you what they dreamed after the fact. But there is some guesses and some theories from scientists today about why we dream. And I'm going to tell you what a few of them are. So there is one set of scientists that believes dreams are just our brains interpreting all of the neurons randomly firing while we're asleep, and they mean absolutely nothing. It's just our brains trying to make sense of something that is completely random. There is another group of scientists that believe that dreams play a very important role in memory consolidation. So their theory is that since we mainly dream about stuff that happens to us during the day, it is our brains going through all that information, picking out the important things that we're supposed to remember, and getting rid of all of the little things that don't matter. Like, it doesn't matter that I wore this shirt today, but it does matter that I had to teach today, and that is what I'm going to remember, not necessarily what I'm wearing. There's another group of scientists that actually kind of branch off of that and think that dreams are about memory consolidation, but specifically about being able to disassociate traumatic memories from the emotions that we have during them. This is actually a really big study for PTSD because during a PTSD dream, all of your hormones that are normally subdued are still really elevated, and that's why the memory is still so traumatic for those people. So, the common theory among all of those are there's no otherworldly significance to the dreams. They're just our brains working as our brains are working. But there are a lot of people who believe that dreams are way more significant than that, and they can tell us a lot of new and interesting things about ourselves and possibly the future and all of the different things going on in the world around us. One of the most famous people who has these theories, which you probably already guessed, Sigmund Freud. He's probably the most recent one to publish a book on interpreting dreams that got really popular. And his whole theory was that in dreams, our brains are trying to show us all of our really horrible, disgusting desires and disguising them so they won't frighten us awake. Well, most people don't believe that anymore. But he actually got his inspiration from the Greeks and the Egyptians, which is the important part for today because that is the culture in which these stories come from. So, there have been, even before Freud, hundreds of volumes of books written on the interpretation of dreams in hundreds of different languages and with many different cultures. And they all try to divide dreams up into different categories and try to, basically, these books tell you, if you dream about this, it means this. So if you've heard the stuff today about, like, if you have a dream where you're running but you're not going anywhere, it means you're really stressed. Or if your teeth are falling out, it means you're really stressed. Or mainly they're about stress. But it's this type of thing where if you dream about one thing, it only can mean this one other thing. But there is also people who are trained to interpret dreams. There are people who are gifted at interpreting dreams, and those are the more complicated ones that can't be written down into those volumes. And while many different religions had one specific god, whenever there were multiple gods, that there would be one that was strictly associated with dreams, pretty much any god can communicate with a dream. It didn't really matter. And these dreams that came from a god were usually instructions for or warnings about the future. And after that, they were normally given out publicly as prophecy, saying, God told me this, so this is going to happen. There were actually even temples that were built specifically for the purpose of trying to have inspired dreams. So if you went to a temple of a specific god, gave a sacrifice, and then slept in that temple, it was because you wanted that god to talk to you in a dream. However, these dreams weren't always very clear, and they normally required interpretation. And literature, including these books and letters and other types of things that we've read, shows that there are many different types of people who interpreted dreams. Like I said earlier, some were specially trained and some were naturally gifted, and some just read from those books. But the people who were able to interpret dreams, especially the really complicated ones, were normally elevated to a very high social status and had political power. Such as Joseph, that Walt just talked about. He had absolutely no power at all. He was imprisoned. He was basically worthless until they found out that he could interpret dreams. And then he became second in command of the entire country. And it also happens to Daniel in the other part of the Torah portion, where he is basically nothing until he interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and then he's appointed into ruler and chief prefect of all of Babylon. So Walt is going to talk more about those two.
Just funny note, difference between me and Allie. She talks about Sigmund Freud. I prefer Timothy Leary. Well, Timothy Leary, you know. Some of you people don't know who Timothy Leary is, do they? The 60s, okay? He was very involved in the 60s, but LSD was actually created in the 40s, but in the 60s when it was illegal, it was actually put out to the schools, and everybody else was getting high and having some good dreams, tripping out. Well, Timothy Leary was sort of like the head of that stuff. Anyway.
Thanks for explaining.
So some of the ways God communicated. Bobby? There you go. When we read the text, there's a ton of ways God communicated here, but here's just a couple examples. In 2 Kings, Elijah heard from God after the minstrel played. In Numbers, God enabled a donkey to speak to Balaam, which is my favorite story because it just reads, it is my life. You know, I just keep beating that friggin' donkey. God puts stop, no, I'm gonna beat that donkey and get through this one way or the other, you know? So that was one of my favorite stories. In Exodus, the Israelites heard God in a voice through thunder. In 1 Kings, Elijah heard a gentle whisper. In Exodus, God uses many different forms to communicate with Moses. And in Genesis, God speaks to Abraham directly through angels. One more, Bobby. Some of the different ways that God spoke to people in the text, and we went through, this is all done from the ESV. Okay, so these numbers could vary a little bit from different versions, but there's a breakdown here. The Lord said to is 224 times in the Christian Bible or the Jewish Bible or the Tanakh. God said to is 20 times. The Lord God commanded is 87 times. And the word of the Lord came to was 109 times. By my count, God spoke directly to 38 different people, majority of the time, and almost actually half of the time God spoke to people was with Moses. So those are just some interesting facts. The overriding point here that they're making here is God communicated with people in a lot of different ways. And if you look closer, you will see that the different ways God communicated seems to change in time as you read farther and farther into the Bible. He seems to change the way he communicates with people. Everything from originally from dreams until it went to prophets and other forms of communication. So God communicates with us in the 21st century, maybe a lot different than he communicated with people in the 22nd century BC. So I was going to speak on the history of God's communication, then I'll be back to wrap this up. While you're listening to Allie, I would encourage you to think about whether God has communicated with you and what that looked like.
Well, you're saying all 224 times, 109 times, like half of those are to Moses, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, almost half of them, just 48% of them.
0.2, not 48.2.
Okay. So, as Walt said, it seems that God normally would communicate directly to people. So why would he sometimes choose to use dreams, and why does that seem to slowly die out throughout the Bible? Well, there are still people later in the Old Testament and the New Testament who receive dreams. It doesn't seem to be quite on the same scale. So the real honest answer is we have no idea. There's not really a way to know why God would choose to communicate us with certain ways, but we're going to guess anyway. So one possibility of why we don't see dreams as much is, so there is the idea that if you have a dream, especially a dream about the future, it was only a prophecy if it came true. But you have to wait for it to come true to know that. So that that's one of the problems. And then there's a problem with that doesn't allow for the chance for coincidence, and it actually encourages something called confirmation bias, which is when you use evidence to confirm something you already believe and normally ignore evidence to the contrary. So, like, if I had a dream that, oh man, I should have thought of an example beforehand because I can't think of one right now. Like, if I, for some reason, had a dream tonight that my mom was going to come and visit me next week, I wouldn't know for sure until she might come next week. But it also could be that I tell her about it, so then she comes to visit. Now, what does that actually mean? So another theory is one that we hear often, is that God just doesn't communicate with us directly anymore, but we're going to probably prove that wrong with Walt's next thing. But on the other hand, when it comes to dreams, we could just not have anybody who's gifted in interpreting dreams anymore, especially a biblical person who would be gifted interpreting dreams. What I'm going to talk about more is the idea that this form of communication just became really unreliable. So in ancient Mesopotamia, which is Egypt and Israel and all of the places in between, and Rome and Greece and all of those places, there were many different methods for talking to the gods and interpreting what the gods wished and future events. All of these practices were called divination, which, if you've read the Bible, you know is pretty much openly condemned all of the time. But dream interpretation and also the casting of lots were very common practices in divination, but those are used in the Bible for God to communicate. So why would he do that sometimes but not others? So one main theory is that divination just became very unreliable. As I was talking about earlier, a lot of these practices required an interpreter. It was very subjective. There was no way for me to look at the bottom of my cup and the coffee grounds in it and be able to say, oh, this is going to happen on the next new moon or whatever. Because I would have to be trained in how to read coffee grounds or tea leaves to be able to know that. So these people would be trained in how to read these signs and how to understand what the gods were telling them. And when they became more popular and when they became correct most of the time, they would increase in social status and political power. And as we all know, power corrupts absolutely, and sometimes they would lie or be more vague just so that they could have more of that power. The thing that comes to mind is the magicians in the movie The Prince of Egypt. Everybody know that movie? I can put it up there. That was the best picture I could find. But that is what I think of, is these two bumbling guys who just perform random little magic tricks for the Pharaoh because they just want to be in the Pharaoh's palace and not because they actually have any actual power. So, a little bit more about what these practices were. There was a lot of different methods and things besides dreams. Some of them are a little disturbing. They involve like entrails and things, throwing bones, casting lots, all of this stuff. But they were all required the interpreter. And the best way I know how to explain this is it would be like you had a set of dice, but they were completely blank. They had no numbers on it whatsoever. But there's this one person who is especially trained to read these dice. Only they can see the numbers that are on it. So when you're rolling the dice to try and figure out which number you have to trust that that person will tell you the correct number, because you can't see that you rolled a 3 because those dice are blank. But that person is going to tell you that you rolled a 3. Does that kind of make sense? A little bit? Okay. And that is also one theory why the practice of casting lots was actually used more often, is because it's one of the only practices that was completely objective. Everyone involved could see exactly which person drew the short straw. But there's a difference with the dreams that are interpreted in the Bible. Who are the people who interpret dreams in the Bible? Give me a few examples. Joseph. Well, obviously Joseph and Daniel. Can anybody think of anybody else?
Peter interprets his own dream, or tries to.
He tries to.
Yeah, Joseph's brothers and father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so what is one, I'm gonna let y'all try this. What is the one thing that they always do before and after they interpret a dream?
Someone tells.
Before and after they tell what the dream is.
Right. Joseph made sure to say it was God that was interpreting the dream.
They always give credit to God first. They always say, this is not me doing this. I am not the person interpreting this. God is telling me what your dream means. They take no credit for themselves. And often they start out interpreting the dreams of nobody. The prison guards, their siblings, people that don't have any power at all. Yeah, and even though they often do get elevated in social status and power, they never claim the credit for themselves in the text. Yeah. Now Walt is going to wrap it up.
I wonder if you had a dream and you go to get somebody to interpret it, and then you don't really like that interpretation, so you go to somebody else to get another interpretation. And you keep
Probably good.
searching for the right ones, for the one you want, you know.
Yeah, there were many
His
different
second-
temples. Yeah. Different temples with different interpreters.
So the whole idea about this, and to continue our theme, our overarching theme of to live in our portions, is what's that got to do with us today, and what are we going to do with it? Sometimes when you read areas of the text, it's hard to figure that part out, you know. what do I do with Daniel's dream? You know, how does that help me in my life today? You know, what do I do? So the focus today was on communication and God's communication with us. Now this is where I contradict myself, because anybody that's ever talked to me about this will know that I say constantly that God doesn't deal with our day-to-day crap. Well, I don't believe he does. I don't believe he's involved with our day-to-day crap. I believe God's sort of like gravity. And if you search that on the internet, you'll get people talking about God as gravity, but as being something you can see or you can't see, but is always there. But I look at it as gravity, as gravity pulling. No matter where I end up going, how far off track I get, I'm always being pulled back. And he guides me right back to where he wants me. And I've gotten way off track many times. And then I look back at my life and things that I know, and it's hard to keep that argument going that God has nothing to do with day-to-day, with your day-to-day crap, right? Because just some examples that I have, and then we'll see what everybody else has. My brother, for instance. My brother was 50 years old. He was a healthy guy. He was actually a pretty big and strong guy. He was very healthy. He was a troublemaker most of his life, and he had broken pretty much every relationship in the family that he could break from time to time. But I forget what month it was, but one day he decides he's going to go up to New Jersey, where my family is, where most of our family is, and visit everybody. He goes up there and visits everybody. Everybody goes out to dinner together. The biggest group of our family in one place at one time. He was up there for a week. Come home, and he died 2 weeks later. It was like something was telling him that he had to make things right. had the same, a similar thing with my father. Me and my father never really got along. Not that we didn't get along. We just didn't communicate well. My brother and my father were together all the time. When me and my father were together, we weren't angry at each other. We had nothing like that, but we just didn't have nothing to say. We didn't have anything to talk about, nothing that we seemed to go to get along with. So we go through our life. He's living down in Florida. We were living up in West Virginia. And my brother called me one day, said, hey, your father wants to see you. Oh, my father wants to see me. He's never asked to see me before, right? So we pack up the kids and go spend Christmas with him. Probably the best time I've ever had with my father. I mean, we talked and we just got along great. And I went back and then got back to West Virginia about, I think, somewhere around the 28th of December. And the 6th of January, he died. So it was like God was saying, you got to make this right. You got to get together before this ends. And then the story that most of you have heard, or a lot of you in this room were part of, is my adventure through the New Orleans mission. So anybody that don't know the details, I'm going to get a little bit clearer with the details than I have been in the past. I was addicted to opiates, and I was addicted bad. And we were in Florida, and it just got worse and worse and worse. I had been through rehab once, or at least detox once, and I'd get back on it again, and I just could not kick this thing. And finally one night, I just parked the company truck, got on a bus, and came to New Orleans. When I did that, I went through this through a website, and it said they had a clinic I could come to here. So I get off the bus, I got $70 in my pocket, I ain't got a bag, ain't got nothing else, and I go to the clinic, and they say, oh, sorry, you have to be a Louisiana citizen to come here. So now I'm out in the street, I got nothing, $70 in my pocket, and that was it. I end up at the New Orleans mission. Through the New Orleans mission, along with everything else, I mean, my time at the New Orleans mission, for somebody that was at the mission, was actually pretty good. If I kept my head out of it, meaning that if I wouldn't have been thinking about everything they were saying and all that stuff, it would have been great. I mean, I had my own areas to work in. I pretty much came and goes up pleased. So it really wasn't a rough time for me as compared to some of the other people. While I was there, here's a God thing for you. I'm getting ready to leave. I went to John Proctor was my supervisor, or he actually was the head of all the operations. So I go to John Proctor one day and said, look, I got a wife, I got a kid, I can't do this no more. I gotta support my family. I'm not being the man I should be, and I'm not supporting my family. I said, so I gotta leave. And I'd already lined up a job and everything. And he said to me, he says, I understand, which is weird because most of the time when somebody tries to leave there, they attack them with all the pastors and everybody comes after them and tries to convince them that they're breaking their code and all this stuff and everything else. But he says, I can understand that. He says, but if you can give me 30 more days, he said, I think I might be able to help you out. So I said, what the heck, for another 30 days? Well, a week later, I'm in the kitchen working, and Bruce comes up to me and asks me if I want to work with him. He was working over there. And I figured John Proctor had talked to him about me, but it was just the opposite because he said, well, I got to get cleared with John Proctor first. So, I mean, why did that happen? And that directly led me to here, led me to working with Bruce, coming into this community, and all the relationships that went with that. When you do the rowboat thing, and you look at where you've been and where you're at, there's no way that God wasn't involved in it. I went and got a room over at Alex's place. It wasn't there long. Matt, we ended up over at Camp Hope, doing the Camp Hope thing. My wife that had no reason in the world to come to New Orleans with me. If anything, just the fact that she even was willing to come anywhere with me at that point, is amazing. I went to pick her up, and my daughter decided to come along too. So God has been, it has to be God. I mean, it's just a process of elimination. I'm not a lucky person. I don't win lotteries or anything like that. Well, I do pretty good with the gambling, but that's another story for that. So that's my story. That was it was over 6 years ago. And so I can see how God communicated with me. So I thought maybe we'd open the floor.
Brick walls.
Sorry?
Is that how you communicate, brick walls?
It's the brick wall, yeah. So I thought maybe we'd open the floor and people could share some of their experiences, if they have any experiences with God. And I'll talk at once. Okay.
Well, it's actually a dream, but, and I don't know what, I know the feeling that I had after it, and that to me indicated that it was from God. But after my grandmother passed away, this was years ago, and it was several months after she passed away, and I had a dream, and in my dream, I was walking down a country road, and there was a field of, I don't know, grain or something. It was just like this it was like a postcard, like this cotton candy sunset, and it was like this summery country, and I was alone. And all of a sudden I hear a car coming up the road. And I turn around, I'm standing in the middle of the road, and here comes my grandma in a Corvette, convertible Corvette. And I don't know why it was a Corvette. She's never driven a Corvette in her entire life. But she's driving this Corvette up the country road, and I can see her from a distance, and she's coming. I knew it was her. And she gets right up to me, and then all of a sudden she like turns the wheel and goes, and the dust comes up and it settles, and she looks at me and she just smiles and she says, "I'm okay." And then she turned around and drove off. I know, it was so weird. But it was just, it was a dream, but it was just so vivid, and the feeling that I had afterwards, because I did wonder about her. You know, my grandmother never talked about God. I knew she was a God-fearing woman. She always had a Bible in the back of her toilet in her bathroom, so I knew she was reading it at one point. You know, and she always kept the Footprints poem on her wall. So I knew she had a relationship with God, but she never really shared anything with me. And so I always just, you know, after she passed away, I guess part of me just kind of wondered, you know, was she okay? And I just wanted to believe that she was, you know, that she was with God, and that she was well. And it just gave me an overwhelming feeling that she's just fine, and she's taken care of, and she's in His presence, and it was a really good dream.
One of the things I wonder about is, do we have too much crap going on to recognize it? I mean, we don't even waste time at a stoplight. If people at a stoplight, person are doing is looking at their phones, you know. Would we even know it if it happened? It's so much different in my eyes than the days we were talking about, the biblical days, where, you know, you had a desert, you had a tent, you know,
Yeah.
everybody. Now we're just so busy and we've got so much stuff going on, and it's also not socially acceptable as it was then. I mean, a lot of people would think you're a little bit crazy if you said you had a dream and God was guiding you in the dream. So
back then there was no separation between spiritual and your everyday life. Everything was spiritual all the time. Everything was from some sort of God.
Bobby, you want to put up that last frame? This is interesting. There's this, it's called the, what did we say it was? Entheogen. The entheogen theory. The word was coined in 1979 by a group of ethnobotanists as a study of the relationship between man and plant. But the real, literal meaning of the word is that which causes God to be with an individual. And go back to the Timothy Leary thing. There was a double-blind study done in 1962, the original one. It's been repeated over and over back then, and it's always come out the same. Students receiving hallucinogenic drugs before attending a service, and it was a church service. Just the first one was done on a Good Friday, and they were going into Catholic Mass. The students that had taken the hallucinogenic drugs, almost all having a profound religious experience, while the students receiving the placebo reported very little. And psychotropic drugs have been looked at and looked at and looked at for their spiritual effect and everything else. And we have to wonder, we have no facts. We do have some facts about the Second Temple period and some of the findings that there were different drugs involved at the temples and places like that. But we don't know anything going back as far as Daniel or Joseph or any of that stuff. But you have to wonder,
Were they high on something?
well, did it, yeah, and did it help? This study here, if you were just looking at it, if you looked at it in a vacuum, where drugs weren't bad and all this stuff here, you just took the study in a vacuum, and you said you wanted to have a better religious or experience, then why not? Why not take the hallucinogenic drugs? It's proven to work to make your experience better, right? So, but of course, that's in a vacuum, like I said, without no laws or nothing else that's going on. So back then, the rules were about intoxication, right? That was what you weren't allowed to do, is be intoxicated. Did they consider that intoxicating them? Did they consider, could that be considered ritual? So it's interesting to think about whether how much of that was involved. You know, there was mushrooms around then, and probably plenty of plants out there. Considering that area of the world is the producer of most drugs, plants for most drugs we have. So, go ahead.
I have a question for Allie. You keep saying that the dream interpreters were trained. Do you know, or have you read anything about what it looked like for someone to be trained in dream interpretation?
I tried to find out more about it, but I couldn't find a lot of specific things. As far as I know, it was a lot of like studying those books. And I know that for the Greeks, there were oracles, and they were seen as gifted in being able to interpret dreams and prophecy and other such things. And I think that they were just seen to be chosen by that God to be communicating with them.
Were there anything involved in like the family, like the father was somebody that interpreted dreams, teaching the son, or teaching who that had occurred?
Not that I know of in Greek or Roman cultures. I think that could be argued for like Abraham and way back then, because that, like, at that point, religion was basically like a household thing. It wasn't a huge organized thing.
But there's like counselors and therapists that believe in dream interpretation today, and it pertains more to the subjects in the dream, but then like what the person's going through in their life and their like emotional state. So it would be like, oh, you have reoccurring dreams that your teeth are falling out, right? Keeps happening. And you're also you have a family of 5, and then you're not making enough money, you're struggling financially. Maybe the dream has something to do with your teeth falling out, has something to do with provision. It would be something like that. So the whole thing is that there might be some stress that you're not admitting in your life, or something that's really getting to you. And the theory is that your subconscious is really powerful, and you're going to see that in your dreams. And that's a theory, but as Allie had already said, it's really hard to be scientific with that, which is what psychology is. It's a science.
It's a social science.
It's a social science, yeah.
And that goes back to now there's a separation between, it's called the secular and the sacred, but the spiritual and the everyday. And back then, everything was considered a sign from a god. So if you had a dream like that, it was a god telling you you needed to do something more to provide for your family, if the interpretation was the same.
Which is the same thing we talked about before, was in the same context. Back then, most people thought if a cloud came in from a certain direction, it was God. So, I mean, it was, and one of the other things that I find weird about dreams is that not everybody remembers their dreams, or even notices a dream. I mean, I don't have dreams. I have dreams. I know I do because I know the science that I have dreams, but I don't ever remember a dream. The only time I ever remember having lucid dreams that I remember is on a drug called tramadol, and that wasn't hallucinating. I guess it does something to the sleep pattern that I remember my dreams. But my wife, for instance, over there, she remembers her dreams in detail. And so that would have a lot to do with it, especially if you don't remember it in detail and you try to fill in some of the blanks when you're talking to somebody about the interpretation of it.
So with this slide, is this suggesting or opening up the possibility that the writers or like the characters in the Bible are taking hallucinogenics?
No, this slide doesn't have anything to do with them. This is about LSD and a few of the drugs, and that period in the 60s before it became illegal, and there was a lot of experimenting done with, and a lot of it was about spiritual, be more awakened spiritually. That was a lot of the reason for a lot, and the fact that literal meaning of that word is that which causes God to be within an individual. So that in itself explains that's what it was about. The rhetoric about whether they were eating mushrooms back in the 22nd century BC, I don't know. I'm just putting it out there that it was. Right. You know,
Right.
It wouldn't shock me if evidence came that a lot of the prophets and people like that were taking a little tasted mushroom once in a while.
Walt, you threw something out there, that's great.
Yeah. I mean,
Really, if they've been around forever,
Yeah.
mushrooms and.
Yeah.
Well, my son was telling me a book that he read about the early Christian church, like the Catholic Church. You know how they, at a high mass, they have the incense and
Yeah.
they walk the aisle? Yeah. Well, they found these incense holders and all from thousands of years ago, and they found there's drugs in there. So they would go and the people would be breathing in this drugs and all that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, LSD, for instance, was developed in 1940 something. It didn't become illegal until 1968. I mean, all those years. So if something is illegal or something is unknown, I mean, you have to wonder. And like I said, in the Second Temple area, we do have some evidence now. Archaeology has discovered that there was different, I guess it would be chemicals left behind that let them know that there was some drug use going on back then at the temple.
Where's that?
In Jerusalem. So.
Can we go back to Joseph's dream for a minute?
Mhm.
So when I study, I tend to look for patterns. I don't know why I'm wired up that way, but I look for patterns and numbers and things because those have significance as well. You know, there's a whole study of numbers in the Hebrew culture that's where you can really go deeper into what Hebrew letters and mean and just really open up the meaning of a passage. But it's interesting what you were talking about earlier because you were saying that anytime a dream was interpreted by one of God's people, they always started by giving God the credit. But at the beginning of Joseph's life, when he mentions his two dreams, he's the one telling the dream, having the dream, telling the dream, and it's actually his brothers and dad who interpret it. And there isn't any credit given to God during this, But what I noticed right off is that he has two dreams. Later on, he's in prison. He's approached by two people who have a dream. So there's two dreams. And he gives God the credit while he interprets those dreams. And then he ends up being, finding out about Pharaoh. Pharaoh has had two dreams and wants them to be interpreted. The irony about that is that Pharaoh is considered a deity. He should be able to interpret his own dreams. Ooh. So the fact that he comes, that he's looking for an interpreter for his dreams is interesting because these are dreams that are not, these are different dreams. Dreams that he cannot interpret. I would.
Yeah.
That's what
Well,
it
it
seems
also
like,
goes kind of back into, I don't remember who said it earlier. I think it says in the story that he asked his magicians and diviners and stuff first. And I think either they couldn't do it or he just didn't like the answer. And so he started looking for somebody else.
Right.
And the cupbearer and the baker told him about.
Right.
Whichever
But
one
I
was
know-
left, one of them got canned, but you got a little silver.
Yeah.
I noticed how many times there's pairs in the number 2, and the number 7 is 23 times in this passage, and which is a holy number. But in verse 23 of chapter 41, verse 32, he says, "The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon." And because we already kind of know what's going to happen at the end of the story, you just sort of see everything in Joseph's life come to fruition, like in these pairs of dreams that happen, and how God has used given him this gift that has enabled him to come full circle in his life, because he ends up coming full circle and, facing his brothers and everything that happens in those relationships. But yeah, there's so much more there too.
Yeah, because him interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams is sandwiched between the first 2 dreams and the fruition of the first 2 dreams.
Yeah.
It's all interesting.
The other funny part about it, the part that I didn't understand about it is, and I guess it's just God working his way, if Joseph wouldn't have been the one to interpret it, if one of the magicians or one of the other people would have been able to interpret it, especially with the I mean, why go through the Pharaoh? I mean, obviously the Pharaoh thought he was a deity on his own. So God using the Pharaoh's dream to get a message across, that just strikes me as he does often, I guess. He uses non-believers, people that to get his message across to people that are.
It just gets so tricky. I know there's a story, I think it's like King Saul goes and visits a divination witch or something like that, and the witch does her thing and it works, and it actually works, and gets to talk to some dead prophet, and so it's like, this stuff that's not sanctioned by God.
Goes
It's
on
like,
all the time throughout the Bible.
yeah, right. It's, but there's still something there, and how do you know if what you're hearing is true, what you're hearing is right? We benefit for these guys. You get to look back on it. Oh yeah, that one came true. That was definitely God right there, right? So how do we know if it's God talking to us or a chili dog we ate too late?
That's the hard part.
Therein lies the whole issue. It's the doors. When do you know which door God put there? Which door,
It's like, it just
depending on
seems.
how you believe, whether you think somebody else put it there.
Well, do we recognize God's voice? Do we recognize God's working in our life? You know, I think that's what that makes me think of is.
And that's why, like I said, for me, he's been like gravity. I've taken many of the wrong doors, but there's always another door available to me that, you know, as time goes on, I can pass through. So he's always pulling me, no matter where I'm coming from. He's always there, and I think he shows in a lot of the stories where, in fact, most of the stories, the people, the heroines or patriarchs on paper didn't deserve to be the one God picked. You know, so whether it be Moses or any of them, I mean, they just on paper they don't. I don't know that in the text it talks about Moses ever practicing Judaism or not. It wasn't really there, but I mean, ever practicing a relationship with God until he shows up in the burning bush. So why did he pick him? Or, you know, why would he pick somebody that had a relationship with him? So I guess that's good news for people like me. That he often picks the wrong ones. Anything else?
I think with just talking about communication, and with this story, it's not, I don't think it, I don't know, to me, it's not the method. For the dreams are not the method, or the dreams are the method. The dreams aren't the message. Like God chose Joseph, I mean, and you can do your algorithms, babe. But Joseph even had a time where, didn't he talk to Pharaoh when he was talking to Pharaoh or something like, I've been in prison, I've been wrongfully accused, blah, blah, blah. Wasn't there that dialogue with somebody at some point with Joseph? But it took like I said, it took Joseph coming full circle before he understood what all this meant. Like, he didn't realize, he had anger and seeming vengeance, but yet pain, because when his brothers came. But then when you get to the end of the story and they all beg for forgiveness, it's at that point that Joseph says, look, if you guys wouldn't have sold me to these,
Well, what you did for evil, God did for good.
right. And so that's what, the term, the dreams and his interpretation, I don't know, I feel like I said, I think the method is dreams, but I think the message with all this is just how God can, if you continually fall, he's constantly pursuing you, and and no doubt there was, I mean, we don't know, but I'm sure there wasn't any separation, day to day. I think we do just have too many distractions, but we can all, I know I can, question where I'm at times, but then when you know, you do come full circle, where you are able to look back and say, okay, I see why that happened, or, you know, maybe it wasn't a dream, but just events that have led to a certain point, you know, so.
Probably reading a book in the stat, talks about the state of mind, and how the state of mind, even unconsciously, can change your outcomes, depending on your mind, and do a couple different experiments to show it. And I wonder about Joseph. So, if we looked at it from a secular point of view, or this book that we're reading would be looking into it, they might make the case that Joseph, essentially being hated by his brothers, and had a bad relationship there, dreamed of something that he wanted. And that's all the dream was something that he wanted, but he believed it. And by believing it, that kept it going until it happened.
Self-fulfilling
Yeah,
prophecy.
self-fulfilling prophecy, you know. But, you know, all we have is text to go by, but I wonder if that might play a role in it.
What about Martin Luther thinks that he had a dream? State of mind.
That's a different dream. That's a daydream, not a night dream.
And it hasn't came true yet, so it can't count.
What about premonition? Could it be?
Yeah, what stands out to me in the Joseph story is, I mean, obviously this guy went through so much, not just rejection from his family, but like, you know, if they didn't kill him, they sold him as a slave, their own brother. And then he lives such an upstanding life. You would think, you know, this guy's, you know, going places, right? And he does, but that doesn't stop circumstance from bringing him down, throwing him into a pit, imprisoning him. But the whole entire time, he doesn't waver from God. You don't see his character, you don't see him outbreak. Not that he has much choice, but you actually see that he's trusting and he's humble, you know, which, you know, in the rabbinic writings, there's Messiah ben David, who's the one that's going to be this king that's riding on the horse, and he's this warrior that's going to bring political freedom and set the refugees free, but like, then there's the Messiah ben Joseph, the one that's super humble and basically relies on the Lord, relies on God, and trusts in God, the one who is in control, right? And I think it's just, I think God could communicate to you through a dream, he can communicate to you through scripture, but are we really going to receive it if we don't trust him? If we don't trust in God? I mean, I think that's what it really boils down to is, you know, trusting in him. And if I do have this dream that's really, really weird, am I just saying, well, I had too much sugar last night, which is a possibility, or maybe it's convicting and I should listen to that. I've had both happen, and I would totally encourage anyone listening to be open to that, because I think our God does communicate through dreams. I think he does, and I think we need to be open to it, as weird as it is and as hard as it's to measure with science. I think we should be open to it.
One of the things that always stuck out to me about Joseph is the fact that they say Messiah ben Joseph, and they talk about his humility and all that stuff. And when I compare Joseph to, let's say, Esau. Who's the humble one? Open arms, Esau. Open arms to Jacob. go in, hug him, everything's cool. Jacob or Joseph, start jumping through hoops, baby. You got some work to do before I take care of you, you know what I mean? So I don't see the humility involved in that. And in the writings, I never see him talk about God, other than saying that God is doing the interpretation of this. Never talks about it. It doesn't say anything in that order. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means it's not in the text. So.
Yeah, I think it's good pushback, because what kind of humble person would go to their brothers and say, "Hey guys, I had this dream about you," meaning like I'm gonna rule over you, right? But
Then in the
if
end,
it is from God,
but look at the end-
should you say something?
Look at the end of the story. All the hoops he made him jump through before he accepted him again.
Yeah.
So.